Americans have always depended on women in times of war, and women have always been present in some form in the American armed forces from the very inception of our history. The roles and the opportunities that women have had in that context have always changed according to the changing nature of war itself and in sort of tandem with larger changes in American society. As far back as the American Revolution, women played a very significant role, but a very traditional role as cooks and laundresses, nurses, camp followers, as they're often called. And this continued right into the American Civil War at a slightly heightened level. Women that were more sort of keen to sort of break out of those traditional roles and play a more active role in the conflict often disguised themselves as men. And you probably have heard of some of the stories. Deborah Sampson, who was a veteran of many battles in the American Revolutionary War, and then Sarah Wakeman, whose photograph appears in the slide here, who served in combat in the American Civil War with one of the New York regiments. The First World War, because it was the first major total war this country got involved in, saw a significant escalation in the role of women in the American military. There were 23,000 U.S. Army and Navy nurses who served in that conflict, many of them overseas. 400 of them died while in service. 13,000 women served in the First World War in various capacities, usually in a supportive or auxiliary role, helping the military as typists or clerks, switchboard operators, drivers, and so on. But as soon as we won the war and the crisis passed, the military sort of returned to its largely all-male role. But certainly, women's enormous contribution to victory in World War I was not uncoincidental with the fact that women received the right to vote shortly thereafter. World War II, because it's a much greater conflict in terms of its scope, saw much greater involvement on the part of American women. There were 400,000 women who served at home and abroad in mainly in military auxiliary units like the Women's Army Corps. And of course, there's the whole Rosie the Riveter phenomenon in which women contributed markedly to American victory, but not wearing a uniform and not ever leaving our shores. There were 60,000 women nurses in World War I, including Dr. Margaret Craig Hill, who became the first female doctor to become a commissioned officer in the U.S. Medical Corps. And women would serve on every front that America was present on in the Second World War, including the 37 unfortunate Army nurses who were captured in the Philippines in 1942. Many of them languished in Japanese prisoner of war camp for several years. There's the case of Martha Gellhorn, who I'm sure you're familiar with, famous Collier's magazine photographer, who actually landed in Normandy on the first day, and was able to do so because she reputedly took the place of Ernest Hemingway, sort of jumped the queue, and stowed away in one of the vessels that was headed to Omaha Beach. Again, in recognition of women's substantial contribution, just after the Second World War, women's role in the military would be institutionalized and recognized as a permanent part of our armed forces. This was the 1948 Women's Armed Services Integration Act. To bring things more up to date, during the Vietnam War, there were 40,000 women who deployed to the Southeastern Asian theater, 90% of them in a nursing capacity. In 1976, women were admitted to American military academies, and during the Gulf Wars of 1990-91, 40,000 women deployed during Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, but none of them were allowed yet to engage in combat. And just to give you some historical perspective, we considerably lagged in this regard when you consider that Russia had allowed women into combat roles as early as 1917, and women played a significant role in combat units in the Red Army during the Second World War. In 1993, an estimated 67% of positions in the U.S. Armed Forces were open to women, and in more specialized branches like the Air Force, the rate was much higher. But the real turning point occurred in 2013 when women were allowed in combat in a limited capacity. 3 years later, 2016, all combat positions were opened to women. In the current operations taking place in Iraq and Afghanistan, to give you a sense of women's combat involvement, there have been 10,000 combat action badges that have been awarded, and 2 women have received the Silver Star. So where are we today? We've made substantial progress in the last century. In theory, all positions in the armed forces are open to women. That's in theory. That includes combat elite units like Rangers. Lieutenant General Laura Richardson, whose photograph you see in the slide, is the first female commanding general of the U.S. Army. She replaced General Abrams. And last year, a study revealed that 16% of all American military personnel are women. Obviously, that's still a fledgling number, but to give you some perspective, it is better than Canada and France, and it's considerably better than Great Britain, which is only 10%. So certainly much still needs to be done in this regard. We certainly want to advance this phenomenon further. There are persistent challenges that face women who volunteer and serve in our armed forces, but I'll sort of turn things over to our speakers, who I'm sure are likely to address some of those things. Our first speaker, just to my left, is Krista Stevenson. She is the director of the Women's Veterans Call Center at the VA. She oversees operations, all the operations of this important veteran support service. She also was the deputy director of the VA Suicide Prevention Program. In 2008, she received a Master's of Science and Nursing degree with a focus on healthcare administration, and has held various nursing and administrative positions within the Canandaigua VA Medical Center. From 1994 to 2000, Krista served on active duty as a Nurse Corps officer with the U.S. Army. This is from 94 to 2000. She was stationed at a range of stateside and overseas locations during this time, from Walter Reed Army Hospital in D.C. to Yongsan, South Korea. Her son Scott has followed in her mother's noble footsteps and is currently serving as a U.S. Army combat medic with the 10th Mountain Division. Just to her left is Master Sergeant Tamara Bressett. She joined the Army in May of 1987 and attended basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. She served as a preventive medicine NCO in the 105th Medical Detachment, where she participated in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. She separated from the active Army in July of '93 after 6 years of service and moved to Chandler, Arizona with her husband. In August of 1997, she joined the Army Reserve and reclassified to become an Army Reserve Career Counselor in the Active Reserve Program. While stationed in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, she worked with the 88th Regional Readiness Command and is an Army Reserve recruiter. Tamara was subsequently assigned to the 1st Battalion Army Reserve Career Division, which was based in Penn Yan, New York, where she served as a career counselor, a special missions NCO team leader, and a sexual harassment and assault response and prevention NCO. Her multitude of awards include the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters, very impressive, the Army Achievement Medal with 5 oak leaf clusters, the Good Conduct Medal with 6 knots, and the Volunteer Service Medal. Tamara also holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology from Columbia Southern University. To her left is Laura Stradley, Executive Director of the Veterans Outreach Center in Rochester. She is a U.S. Army veteran of 8 years active duty. She was stationed in Korea, Fort Benning, Fort Rucker, and in Germany. While in the latter, she was deployed to Bosnia in support of Operation Stabilization Force. This was a NATO-led multinational peacekeeping force which deployed to Bosnia-Herzegovina after the Bosnian War. Just before leaving the service, Laura earned her Master of Science in Business Administration from Baker College. And since her time in the military, she's continued to work with veterans in a number of meaningful capacities, including transition assistance, counseling, and offering guidance to veterans pursuing higher education or at risk for homelessness. She directed the Monroe County Veterans Service Agency from 2012 to 2017, and became executive director of the Veteran Outreach Center in September of 2017. In 2015, Laura was inducted into the New York State Veterans Hall of Fame, and she has also authored 2 books, The Pocket Idiot's Guide to the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, which is the military entrance exam, and The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. Did I get that correct?
You did.
Okay, thank you. Last but not least is Melissa Springston. Melissa joined the Navy Reserves in 2005 in the Navy Reserve Accession Course Program. Because she was already an LPN, licensed practical nurse at that point, she received the rating of E4 when she went in. She served 8 years as a hospital combat corpsman, green side, make sure that we specify that, and was attached to a Marine Corps battalion. She worked at Camp Lejeune training reservists from around the country in combat first aid triaging, and served as a medic aboard the USS Kearsarge and the USS San Antonio, where I understand that photograph was taken, right?
Yeah, USS San Antonio.
So that is our panel of esteemed guests. I will now turn it over to them. They'll each speak in turn, and then we'll reserve a little bit of time at the end for some questions from the audience. So a round of applause for our guests.
Everybody's looking at me, so I guess I'm up. Yes, thank you for the introduction. When I was asked to participate on this panel, or I was actually asked, do you know any veterans that can participate on the panel? I'm like, yeah, I guess I can. And I drove this lady along with me. I actually had to spend some time really thinking about what I did in service and all of the different experiences I had while I was in service, because I'm sure the other folks have experienced this. When you're in service, that's your job. You just do what you do, and you know, it's like I said, it's what you do. So thinking about actually how I ended up in the Army, and which was a very funny story. I was, in high school trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to be a nurse. Unfortunately, I didn't know where I wanted to go to school or where the money was going to come from to go to school. And I got a mailer. Came in the mailbox. My mom just threw it on the counter. I'm like, oh, what is this? So I looked at it, and it was apply for a scholarship with the Army ROTC program. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And my mom said, no daughter of mine is going to join the Army. I'm like, really? I'll show you. So that's how I ended up joining the Army. I applied for the ROTC scholarship. I received it. I went on to Syracuse University for their nursing program, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant when I graduated nursing school from Syracuse University. And from there, I went on to San Antonio, did my officer basic training there. It was a wonderful time in San Antonio along the Riverwalk. I think I remember some of my studies there. And then after that, my first duty station was Fort Polk, Louisiana. I have no idea how that happened. I had never been out in New York State before, other than, Canada and going to San Antonio. How in the world did I get stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana? Anyways, I go down there. I'm like, okay, it's not going to be so bad. I'm a nurse. I'll be working in the hospital. Get down there. Oh, second lieutenant. It was Harper at that time. You're going to be attached to the 115th Field Hospital. I'm like, what? I thought I'm working in a hospital. So yeah, part of my time I was spent working in the hospital, being a regular nurse. You wouldn't even know I was in the Army, other than we wore either our whites or our BDUs to work every day. And then the other half of my time I spent out in the field at JRTC, which was an experience in itself, because not only was I working in a field hospital, learning how to build the hospital and deliver care in the field hospital, I was now working alongside all the other MOSs in the military, to include the 11 Bravos, which was a whole different animal in itself. Very different experience working in the field. But it is what it was, and you go ahead and you do it. You hear different comments about, now that I think about it, well, that was kind of sexual harassment, but you didn't really think about it at the time, you just did it. So that was my very first experience in the military. From there, I decided that I wanted to specialize in psych mental health nursing. So I went on to a training school that the Army offered. I went to Fort Gordon for 6 months to be trained and certified as a psych mental health nurse. And it was a good time. I went to school for 6 months, classroom experience. And then graduated from there, and then got my next duty assignment, which was Yongsan, Korea, South Korea. I'm like, how does this happen? How do I go from going to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and now I'm going to Korea? So I spent a year in South Korea in Yongsan, working at the 121 field general hospital there, and it was an experience. That 1 year unaccompanied time was an experience with working alongside the United States Army folks and working alongside the South Korean Army folks. So I actually worked alongside Republic of Korean nurse worked with us. We also had South Korean soldiers, which we called Katusas, Korean augmentees to the United States Army. So that was an experience. Again, not a typical hospital environment over there, because I was working very closely with all the other MOSs, and like the infantry guys, the armor guys, all of those other folks. So it typically working in a medical field in the military, there's lots of women in those type of roles. But when you go to a unit like Fort Polk, and in the field and over in Korea, there's more men than just women. After that, I went on to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in DC, and that was just like working in a tertiary hospital, like going to work at Strong Hospital. Other than what we wore to work every day, it really didn't seem like I was, I wasn't in the military, because it was a hospital environment. And it was a great experience for me. I really grew up as a nurse, really learned through all these different duty stations, really learned the ins and outs of nursing, and was able to do more in my nursing career in the service than I would have ever been able to do in the civilian world. Even now, the stuff that I did in the military, you wouldn't even be allowed to do as a nurse in the civilian sector. So after Walter Reed, let me step back a little bit. When I got back from Korea, I got married to an Army soldier, 11 Bravo guy. He was stationed at Fort Bragg. I was stationed at Walter Reed. And the Army would not station us together. They said, oh, you're 5 hours apart, that's good enough. I'm like, I'm not so sure about that, but we did it. I lived in Washington, D.C., he live down there, at Fort Bragg. And then we got pregnant. And we went to our commands. Is there any way that we can please be stationed together? We're married. We have a child on the way. I was like, nope, sorry. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So at that time, my husband decided to get out. After 15 years serving in the military, he chose to get out so that we can be together and I can pursue my career in the Army, which was an unfortunate situation. But looking back on it now, it was the best thing that had happened for us to be able to be a family. After Walter Reed, I went down to Fort Stewart, Georgia. Again, a very interesting duty station because it was mostly field units there. You got the Armor Division down there, at least it was when I was in. So it was a lot of working with the different groups of soldiers besides the medical folks. And from there I decided to get out because they wanted to send me back to Korea, unaccompanied. I'm like, oh no, that's not gonna work for me. It's just not. And I know a lot of people, a lot of women do that. And they're very successful soldiers and moms and wives. And I applaud all of them that are able to do that. But for me, that was something that I could not do. I could not give 100% to my career. I could not give 100% to being a mom, and I could not give 100% to being a wife. And when that happened, I'm like, something has to give. And my priorities at that time were my family. And I decided to get out at that time after 6.5 years in. And then after that, you know, I continued my nursing career, worked in the mental health arena down in South Carolina, and then after 9/11, decided to move back home. So this is my home area here to be closer to family, and then started working at the VA. As I think about this, I don't know how much time I have. As I think about this, one of the most challenging aspects was not during my service time, but it was transitioning out into the civilian sector. And coming in contact with the civilian sector who did not see me and still does not see me as a veteran. And Ed's laughing over there. Ed is the commander of AMVETS, who I'm also a part of. I do lots of volunteer work. Last year, Ed and I spent a lot of time together doing some fundraising out at Eastview Mall. Both of us sitting at the table. I have a big old shirt on that says Army. I have an Army hat on. Everybody came up and was thanking Ed for his service. I'm like, and I just sat there like, really? And they're just talking to Ed like I was nobody sitting there. And Ed's like, well, you know, you really should thank Krista too because she served as well. And then it's like, oh, you know, it takes people back a little bit. Like, oh yeah, you did, you know, and then they say thank you. That's not the first time things like that has happened. Recently, I went to one of the fast food places here. I paid with my credit card, and I banked through USAA, which a lot of military members do. I gave them my debit card. Oh, you bank with USAA? Is your husband a veteran? I'm like, really? Did you really just say that to me? I'm like, yes, my husband is a veteran, and I am also a veteran, thank you. So trying to educate the community that women are serving in the military, and there are women veterans. Another recent example, and it's hard to believe these are extremely recent examples, like within the last month or within the last year. I have veterans plates on my vehicle. I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I was getting into my car and somebody came up to me and says, oh, that's a nice car you have. Is your husband a veteran? I'm like, Thank you. It's my car, and those are my veteran plates on it. And I said it just like that because I'm like starting to get a little irritated in the fact, you know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, right now there are 2.2 million women veterans across the nation. You know, and that's, you know, I want to leave it at that. We have to think, we have to remember that women are serving, and there are more and more women serving, which means there are more and more women veterans out there. So we just have to remember that, yeah, we served as well. Thank you. It's your turn, dear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't really know how to follow that up, but first of all, thank you all for being here today, and if you're a veteran in the crowd, thank you for your service. I don't really have a crazy story. I just, I graduated high school, and then my best friend's stepfather pulled me aside and said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. I was working at a Tasty Freeze in Arizona. It's an ice cream shop like Dairy Queen. And he came to visit me one day at work, and he was upset because my best friend, they were paying her way to go to ASU. And he wanted me to go to college too, but I said, look, I can't do that. I'm working at Tasty Freeze, you know. I live with my sister. And so he said, you know, I was in the Army Reserve for 10 years. He said that you should probably go talk to a recruiter. So I thought about it that night, and I said, well, what else am I going to do? I don't really want to work at Tasty Freeze for the rest of my life. The guy that I worked for used to charge me for the glass that I broke when I did the dishes and stuff. So it was not cool. So the next day I said, well, first I went to an Air Force recruiting office and didn't have a very good experience with a female recruiter that was in the office. She was very condescending, and I don't know, she just wasn't my type. So I got up and left, and as I was walking out, there was kind of all the recruiting stations were in a U shape, and the Army door was open, and the recruiters in there saw me come out, obviously the Air Force station, and they said, hey, why you got that look on your face? And I said, I don't know, I was going to join, but I don't feel like it now. And they said, come in here and talk to us. And there was a female recruiter in there, and so I sat down and started talking to her. She was great, and the next day I went and took the test and joined like 2 days later. So it was pretty quick and easy, and you know, I met my husband at my first duty station. We're still married. We have 4 kids. It's been a good ride, and I'm sorry, but I didn't think I was going to do this. I just recently retired in 2016. When I got off active duty and joined the reserve, I had an opportunity to come to be active reserve, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's where you can be active duty and work for the reserve. So I got to work in little town, well, Milwaukee's not a little town, but I lived in a little town near Milwaukee, and I recruited out of Milwaukee, and then we moved here to Canandaigua. I got transferred to Penn Yan, which was a pretty crazy experience. When we moved here, I had a convertible Beetle Bug, and I used to drive it down to Penn Yan for work, and the first time I got stuck behind a horse and buggy, I was like, what is this? Where am I? They said I was going to New York. Like, but I mean, I was born on the east side of Syracuse, but we didn't stay there long, so I didn't know much about upstate New York. And I had no idea there was a huge Mennonite population here and how beautiful the Finger Lakes are. So we decided that we would do whatever we could to try to stay here because we just love Canandaigua. So my husband and I are both in, we had both gotten off active duty, and then I went in the reserve, and he had a long time out. He was out for like 13 years. When I became a recruiter, I realized that I could put him in the reserve if he wanted to go. So I asked him, because he was a stay-at-home dad while I was recruiting, because that schedule wasn't working for the kids. So he was a stay-at-home dad for 6 years. And then I put him in the Army. So now he was reserve for a little while, and now he's active reserve too. But he's stationed out in Minneapolis right now, his last tour before he can retire and come home. So as far as challenges, there's been many, you know, trying to raise a family, both of us on active duty. We got off of active duty because I didn't want to do that. After Desert Storm, we had to send our dog to my mom, and I was thinking the whole time in Desert Storm, like, okay, what if we would have had a child and we both got sent over here? I really wouldn't want to send my child to my mom's house for 6 months. So when we came back, we discussed it and talked about it, and we decided that we thought one of us was just going to get out, but then they ended up doing kind of what they did to Krista. They wanted to send him to Korea unaccompanied and me to Germany, and that's a 3-year stint. So it was kind of crazy. The Army wasn't really thinking about families at that time. So we ended up both getting out. But it's been very rewarding, lots of opportunities, and I would do it all over again if I could. That's it.
I joined the Army in 1996 right out of high school. Had always thought I'd go to college, and unfortunately my mother passed away in high school, and it was obvious that it was going to be really hard for my dad to pay for college. And so then he got cancer my senior year, so the story does not stay depressing forever. But so I thought at that point I probably would just stay home and take care of him. But he ended up getting surgery and kind of came out the other side of it. But by then I really didn't have any college plans and didn't know what the next step was going to be. And we were watching a special on TV about the Army band, and my dad said, "You should join the Army band." And I was trying to be agreeable, and I said, "Sure, that sounds like a good idea," because he'd just gotten out of the hospital a couple weeks earlier and was still recuperating. So evidently he called the recruiter for me, unbeknownst to me. And so a couple days later I got a call from a recruiter, and I said, "Oh, I'm not interested." And he said, "Well, your dad called. He said you want to join the Army band." I was like, "Oh no." And I was trying to think of a way to explain, how this had all gone down, but he was really quick and he was very good, and you can see the world and we'll pay for college and all these things that I thought sounded really good. So I said, well, I would only do it if I could join the band. I don't really want to do anything else in the Army, that's it. So he said, well, I don't know anything about the band, but we'll figure it out. So I auditioned up at Fort Drum. I'm from Cincinnati, and the audition was a go. So then I did all the other stuff you got to do, took the test, did the physical and everything, and joined the Army. And probably the best thing I ever could have done for myself. I think that even though I had always really thought I'd go to college, I think it was good to really get some discipline and some good direction before I made that decision. I also learned how to do push-ups, which I didn't know how to do before the Army, and still didn't actually when I got to basic training, which was not a good move, and I can remember getting yelled at, "I can't believe you can't even do one," which I couldn't actually, but boy, by the time I got out of the Army, I could do about 60 in 2 minutes, so it worked. That really, that kind of motivation worked on me. But once I got out of basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, I went to advanced training on a Navy base in Virginia Beach called Little Creek Naval Amphibious Base. We trained with the Marine Corps and the Navy for music, which was pretty cool. And then my first assignment was in Wiesbaden, Germany. I was there for 3 years. Loved it. I mean, it was just like I thought I could do that job for my life. We did all kinds of we played at festivals, and the Europeans loved the American military bands, and so it was a really great experience overall. My next assignment was at Fort Benning. Similarly, I got married during my first assignment. The Army took a long time to station us together. He was at Fort McClellan, Alabama, while I was in Germany for a year. We did finally get stationed together, fortunately, at that time. And spent 3 years at Fort Benning. I thought that was kind of boring. We didn't do a lot of fun things. We pretty much just played ceremonies every day. And then I did a year in Yongsan, actually, as well, in Korea. And then a year at Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is where I got pregnant with my twins and decided it was time for me to separate from the military. I had been going to school at night pretty much the whole time I was in, so I finished an associate's, bachelor's, and master's degree, and didn't have any student loans, thankfully, because the military picked up the tab on all of that. So it was, you know, there were some experiences that were not as good as others, but I would say overall, most of the time I spent in the military was really good. I learned a lot. I think developed, you know, just a lot as a person. You know, since that time, I stayed home with my twins for 3 years after I separated from the military. And then I've been working with vets ever since. Not really deliberately, I guess. When I first moved back to Rochester, my sister lives here, which is why I moved back here. I had a really hard time finding a job. I mean, I'd been out of the workforce for 3 years anyway, and prior to that I'd been in the military. So I had no civilian work experience, but I had a master's degree. And most people didn't think that that really indicated that I had experience. And in fact, one company in particular that I applied for said, you have no experience. And I said, well, I do have experience, and I was in the military for 8 years. And even though I was in the band, so it sounds like, you know, all you did was play music, we didn't. We actually had to do all of our own support functions within the unit. So other units, like the line units where there's infantry or combat arms, they have somebody assigned to them that does human resource type work or supply and logistics type of work, generally speaking. The band didn't. We had to do all that ourselves. So for 8 years, I pretty much did a lot of human resource functions. And my degree was in business with a concentration in human resource. So I felt like I had 8 years of experience plus the degree. And they said, well, your experience doesn't count. You know, the military, that doesn't count. And that really just kind of, you know, that was 10 years ago now. And it kind of burned me a little bit, and I thought, I can't believe they would say that. I mean, geez, if I could do that in the military, I could do it for any company, you know, in Rochester. So, and then I ended up working with veterans in one job, and then got more involved in the veteran community, and just kind of continued to progress in that direction. And I find a lot of joy and satisfaction in helping veterans get the benefits that they're entitled to, making sure that they have programs and services that they need, because I know that sometimes things don't always go the way people plan in the military. There's a lot of challenges. I mean, a lot of good stuff, but there are, for many people, a lot of challenges. And some of you have probably heard the statistics, but you know, women in the military, the rates of military sexual trauma are about 1/3. So, you know, for some of those women, they also have combat trauma from, you know, being in combat zones. So it can be very hard for people after they separate to feel like they've really fit back in to the life they had before the service. Which is why, you know, the work that we do at Veterans Outreach Center, we help veterans who may be experiencing difficulty with employment and homelessness, you know, not having the right skills to get back into the civilian workforce, budget issues, legal issues, all those things. And so I think it's, you know, very rewarding. It's my story.
Well, where do I start? Geez, I did the Navy Reserve Accession course, and I had an opportunity out of high school to join the Marine Corps band or the Air Force band. I had my option, but growing up with a father who was Force Recon Marine, I opted, no, I didn't want to do that. So I went to school and got my horticulture degree and pursued that, and And after 2000, well, I went back to I got my LPN degree in 1998 through SUNY Brockport, and the 9/11 happened, and I was working at the VA, at the jury psych at Building 3 in Canandaigua. And I decided, hey, I'm gonna give back to my country. I got back into shape, and in 2005, I joined the Navy Reserve Accession Course because I couldn't join active at the time. I had 4 children, and they're like, no, that's kind of not a good idea. And so I remember when I joined, my recruiter, Alan Foster, outside of Rochester here, got a phone call from my mother saying, you know, you out of your mind? She's a mom of 4 children. And I had to go up to MEPS, take the test still, even though they were going to match me up with my civilian job as an LPN, as an HM rate. And I had to get special permission from a senior chief to get into the Navy Reserves. And I still had to go to boot camp up in Great Lakes outside of Chicago. And that was a fun time. That was really a fun time up there. And I had a lot of stories with my boot camp experience. But after that, I was came back home to Rochester, and I was attached to the Marine Corps battalion. They used to be a tank, but they turned into anti-terrorism because of 9/11 and everything. And I spent many, many months down in Camp Lejeune in Jacksonville, North Carolina, training a lot of the Marines that were going to be deployed to either Iraq, or Afghanistan, or even to Djibouti. And there's me and another female corpsman, and I was out in the field with 124 male Marines and a 50 caliber range. I learned how to shoot that, grenades, and all this other fun stuff with them. But then I had an opportunity to be attached to another Marine battalion, the 24th Marines, 2nd Battalion out of Londonderry, New Hampshire, to do cold weather training, as well as be aboard on the USS San Antonio. And actually that was the maiden voyage. That USS San Antonio was the first LPT stealth ship that was made out of the Twin Tower metals that were after 9/11. So that was really nostalgic experience for me. And then I was at the Navy War College in Rhode Island for medical support for the officers that were going to school there for JAG and everything, and their physicals, and even their families too, work in the medical building with that. I might as well have been active because I took as much opportunity to take the annual training as well as any other training that came my way. I was 35 years old when I joined the Navy Reserves, and I'm just putting it out there. A lot of people think that you should join right out of high school and everything, but there are always other, leaving maybe the National Guard, I could be misspoken, but there are other opportunities out there no matter what age you are that you can give back to the country or join, or what other reasons why you feel like you should, tongue-tied, join the military. And yes, that's, I have 6 kids now. 2 of them when I was in the reserves, and it's just I've been with my experience from Rochester, and then I was attached to Quincy, Massachusetts, Londonderry, New Hampshire, and the Navy War College in Camp Lejeune, as well as Camp Wilson, because I was a combat corpsman. And green side is you're a hospital corpsman, either blue side you stay with the Navy, or green side you're with the Marines. And I remember having a conversation with my commander. He wanted me to be blue side, and I said, out of all due respect, sir, I'm a nurse already. I don't want to be stuck behind a stinky old hospital. And the look of rage on his face, I still laugh to this day. But you know, being a female corpsman, I pulled my weight. I had to prove myself. And until this day, I have earned that respect. And just like Chris was talking about, like, I'm a vet. I have my medical good use tattoo on my back, and it's my Corpsman Up tattoo. And I had one gentleman at Starbucks over the summer ask me, "Oh, was your husband in the Marines?" No, I was. So, that pretty much sums up my experience. Oh, I was also stationed at the Air Force, Buckley Air Force Base in Aurora, Colorado. So that's one thing I was able to do. Even though I wasn't active, wherever I moved across the country, they had a spot for me. And I served 8 years in the reserves, and I never will regret it till this day.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions? Got time for a few questions.
I have a question for Stevenson. Do you think it's possible that the VA is going to open more call centers than they would in Atlanta, like in the future?
You're talking about the call centers in Canandaigua, Topeka, and Atlanta. Those places are where they house the Veterans Crisis Line, which is very different than the Women Veterans Call Center that we have. And, you know, I could talk a little bit about the Veterans Crisis Line because I actually helped develop the Crisis Line many years ago. When the Veterans Crisis Line first started in Canandaigua, we had a total of, it must have been 25 people, right? And we were in Canandaigua in a very, very, very small room, smaller than this table here. Now, there are over 600 employees working with the Veterans Crisis Line, taking care of veterans and active duty service members across the world. Of course, Canandaigua was the first site, and we had several different contracts outside of the VA to help with the overflow of calls that we had at the Canandaigua site. And it was determined just a couple years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, that, you know, we actually should have these backup centers per se within the VA, because VA employees receive that extra training to be able to take care of service members who are in crisis, who are going through PTSD. So the VA slowly have taken away the civilian contracts, and that's why we have opened up the Atlanta Center and the Topeka Center to help with the overflow of calls that come into the crisis line. Also, with that many staff members, I mean, there's not that many social workers or mental health counselors in our particular area. We would just pull them, and we are continuing to pull that particular discipline from other sites, and you know, other civilian sites, you know, are struggling because the VA kept taking their counselors. So that's why we needed to look at other sites across the nation that had high concentrations of that particular discipline. I don't know if they're going to open more centers across the nation. You know, it all depends on the need at that time. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
In the back?
I'm just curious, what do each of you think the biggest issue for veterans is? Like, what should we be focusing on, I guess?
I can address that right now. I don't know. One of the biggest things that I think everybody should focus on is suicide prevention. Everybody needs to recognize when somebody is at risk for suicide. It is so important to recognize those signs. Is somebody having difficulties? Are they struggling with their schoolwork? Are they drinking a lot? Is there some more reckless behaviors going on? The next thing is, it is so important to ask the question about suicide, and this is what everybody struggles with. Even me, I'm a mental health nurse, and I worked in the suicide prevention field for many years. When you're like, ooh, I know I gotta ask that question. They're displaying those signs. I need to ask, are you feeling suicidal? Words. You have to say, are you feeling suicidal? You can't say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because hurting yourself and suicide can be two different things. Somebody can say, yeah, I'm gonna hurt myself, I'm gonna cut myself, but I have no intentions of killing myself. You have to ask the question about being suicidal. And a lot of the times, somebody that is thinking about suicide and is like, yeah, I'm gonna do it tomorrow. They are just waiting for somebody to ask them if they're feeling suicidal. And then, so you ask the question, and then you have to validate that veteran's concern. Validate their story. Say, yeah, I hear ya. I'm gonna get you help. And then to actually expedite care. Take that person to care. Call the Veterans Crisis Line for them while they're there, or say, hey, come with me. We're going over to the health center. Come with me. We're gonna go to the hospital. So those are the most, to me, that's the most important thing to be aware of. Not only the veteran population, but everybody in general. I mean, suicide is an epidemic. And it's not gonna stop until everybody is aware and is out there looking and trying to help that person. Thanks. As you know, I'm very passionate about it.
I think on a much lesser scale, I think people should just try to be maybe not quick to make assumptions. And so, you know, as you've heard, I think from probably everybody up here, we've all had experiences where there was an assumption made, and I have to, you know, I needed to get my new American Legion card renewed, and you know, when I walked into the post that I belonged to, the guy behind the bar said, what do you need, an auxiliary membership, which is, you know, for the spouse of a veteran. And this was last year. So, you know, it's just, and I actually, you know, in my job with the county, I was like the post-service officer for all the American Legion posts. So it wasn't even like, gosh, you know, I can't believe I have to, you know, I said no, and he said, well, what do you need then? I said, I just need my American Legion card renewed. And he still kind of looked at me for a second like, okay, I just, but you know, so I think not making assumptions. A lot of times, you know, another assumption that gets made is if, you know, a veteran separates from service, they have PTSD. They don't all. Another assumption maybe is if a veteran separates from service and they're 22 years old and they don't have a college degree, you know, I think a lot of employers assume that that they're young and they don't have experience. They probably have more experience than most people can imagine. They've had to be responsible for somebody's life possibly already at that age of, you know, 21 or 22. They may have had to have responsibility for millions of dollars of equipment, to move that equipment from one country to another, to actually, you know, be, like I said, in a position that most people may never in their lives be in. And so just kind of trying to not make assumptions about who a veteran is or what they are. And likewise, you know, not every person who separates from the military struggles. Not every person that separates from the military is successful afterwards, and some of those reasons may be because of the military or not. We just hear, you know, I hear a lot of stuff about like, well, veterans this, or a veteran will do that, or a veteran, you can always tell a veteran when you see them in the mall, you know, they got the hats, and I just would try to tell everybody, whatever you're picturing in your mind, just picture yourselves, you know, just picture anybody, because there's no like mold for what a veteran is or what they experience or what they do.
Is there anything, I mean, obviously, you know, you've delineated some of the common problems that veterans experience when they come home that we need to be attuned to. Is there anything, you know, specific to female veterans? Because as a society, we want to do better than what you articulated at the beginning where there's this kind of failure to acknowledge your service in the first place. Is there any sort of set of needs that you're bringing back, that we could be more attuned to? I mean, as female veterans, is there anything that we're overlooking currently as a society?
Yeah, and what Ed said is actually really just being veterans and being treated as a veteran, because and don't think that we need to have white glove treatment. Really, I mean, because we are veterans and we should be treated as veterans and receive the same type of acknowledgement, and to be able to receive the same type of services our male counterparts have.
That's one of the things we're looking at the Veterans Outreach Center is we do a lot of training programs, and we offer training in things like security guard licenses and all that. And so, I've challenged my staff to look at, are the jobs, are the fields that we're offering training in, do any of those reflect fields that women might be interested in going into as well? I mean, sure, there's probably a lot of women who like security guard type work, but let's look at some of the other things, if we do some labor market research, that women might more traditionally be interested in and have a better array of services. When I go to the VA for healthcare, there's no OB services there. There's no obstetrician or gynecology services. So there needs to be care, I think, like you said, in every different aspect. If there's an organization that's serving vets in one way or another, they should be thinking about what are those needs that women have as well.
Do you think that's just a matter of time catching up because women haven't been,
Yeah.
as
We are
active
still
for
a
as long,
minority.
so you're still just kind of catching up to
Yeah.
that, where it's not that it hasn't been thought of, but it just hasn't been implemented.
I'm affiliated with a couple motorcycle clubs in the community, and one of them's Fifth Chapter, and they work they have a lot of meetings for like AA and NA at the VA hospital in Canandaigua, and they do a lot of local events and everything, but there are females that are involved with that because, again, it's the stigma, you're female and you're pretty much on your own, and the community needs to be aware that a lot of us have been through a lot ourselves, and there's a potential, I think more of a higher risk of becoming an alcoholic or a drug addict when you get out, if you are, have a combat trauma or sexual trauma, whatever might have happened to you. But it's a lot of the community is not aware of that, so.
We have found that many women and other veterans who have served in the military don't consider themselves veterans. So we have found when we have asked somebody, are you a veteran? They say no, and then somehow we ask, well, did you ever serve? Well, yeah, I served, but they just don't, the term veteran somehow doesn't resonate with all people who have served in the military. Some of us don't understand it, but certainly it's something that we have found.
Yes, and we actually find that quite a bit on the Women Veterans Call Center, which was so surprising to me. Because we outreach to women veterans across the nation to provide them with information about benefits and services that they may be eligible for. There are many times we call a woman veteran and she tells us, I'm not a veteran. We're like, well, did you serve in the military? Oh yeah, I served, but I'm not a veteran. I never served in combat. I was just in an admin type of role. And so we're doing a lot of education to women veterans saying, you are a veteran and you may indeed be eligible for services. And that's one of the things that we have changed the way that we are asking veterans. We're not saying, are you a veteran? We're saying, did you serve in the military?
There was a question in the back somewhere.
Yes, I was just wondering because pregnancy and the maternal instinct's not something that men are familiar with, and would this kind of be sort of more of a male-oriented profession, being like coming into, you guys are each moms, and how that was going from being pregnant in the military, where only other women can really sort of understand the so many men?
Well, my experience was positive in that regard. I mean, I got out before I actually gave birth to my kids, but I was pregnant while I was in. And there was a lot of dads in the
That's gotta be
military, so
highly scary, I feel like.
I didn't hear you.
That, to me, being pregnant seems to be like one of the scariest aspects of being a military woman.
I was active duty when I was pregnant, and I continued to stay in the service for a couple of years after my son was born. I had such a positive experience being pregnant, but I was also stationed at Walter Reed Army Medical Center when I was pregnant, my unit was so accommodating with being pregnant, you know, and I continued to work, though if there were some days that I couldn't make it into work, which was, I don't even think there was any, but if there was, I would have just called and say, hey, I'm really sick, I can't make it in. But I worked all the way up until the day I delivered, and my actual delivery was amazing because I delivered at Bethesda Naval Hospital. I knew all the staff there because I was a nurse. Unfortunately, everybody was so excited that I was finally giving birth that the whole room was full. I'm like, oh, hey guys, would you give me a little privacy? I work with you every day. But no, they were so excited. And I was able to say, well, at that time, and I know that the rules have changed regarding maternity leave, but I had 6 weeks maternity leave before I was expected to get back to work, which I had a very easy pregnancy. I was very fit. I stayed fit after, so I got right back into it. It was good. No problems. Lots of support.
I was just gonna say, what I was saying about working with a lot of dads was that, you know, I think they were very compassionate about it, but also that the military they have measures in place to accommodate pregnancy. I mean, so for example, I had to do physical fitness in the mornings, but I didn't have to do what the rest of my unit was doing. And you know, you could get put on doctor's orders and things like that. So it wasn't like you were just kind of like out there, you know, forced to do everything as per, you know, if you weren't pregnant. And you probably could speak to
Yeah,
that.
I was given 8 weeks, but when I came back, you had to make sure that you were in shape because you had no excuse not to be involved in the PRT, which is a physical readiness test. And in the reserves, that was done quarterly. So, and you had to run a mile and a half for a certain amount of time, depending on your age and everything, and same with the sit-ups and the push-ups. I never ever failed it, thank God. But you know, even when I first found out I was pregnant with my 5th child, I had to participate in that. So yeah, that was not a fun experience because I had really bad morning sickness, and I just ended up getting sick on the mile-and-a-half run. But being a combat corpsman, I not only had to stay fit for the Navy, since I was attached to the Marine Battalion, I had to meet their qualifications. So I had to run a certain amount of time in a 3-mile run, doing push-ups and sit-ups as well, and that was much tougher than the Navy PRT. I never had any problems being treated differently, being pregnant with my 2 kids. Yeah, if anything, I didn't go out in the field with the Marines. I would stay back behind in the battle aid station. But other than that, my experiences being pregnant in the military were pretty positive.
Okay, last quick question, and then we have to wrap it up.
If you guys ever had to like voice concern or an opinion that was related specifically to being a woman, did you feel like you were heard on those issues, or what was your experience on that?
I think I can take that one. So I joined in 1987, and when I joined, they were just starting, the active duty Army was just starting this program called Equal Opportunity, where they were teaching everybody to be nice to each other and accept people the way they were. So I never, when I joined, I didn't think about the fact that I probably would be the only female in my unit, or I didn't think about the fact that, hey, I'm a girl, I can't do this or I can't do that. Like, it wasn't in my mind that anything I was about to do was going to be any different because of my sex. But I learned quickly once I got into a unit that just about everything you do is different because of your sex. It's pointed out to you every single day. And I had a sergeant who had just gone through this new equal opportunity training, and a bunch of the guys were standing around talking about women. That was their favorite pastime. They liked the women bash because they all had crazy wives. And so they would sit around and do their women bashing, and I'd just be sitting there, you know, listening. And finally one day, and the sergeant that had the training, he knew he was supposed to get up and say, hey guys, you know, knock it off, you can't talk like that anymore. And he wouldn't. So one day they were blabbing away of women bashing again, and they said something really, finally they drew the line with me. So I just stood up and went crazy. I pretty much just went crazy. And I told them all if I had to listen to their bleepity bleepy stuff anymore, that I was gonna find somebody that was gonna listen to me and make it stop. I mean, seriously, even at 19 years old, I knew that what we were doing was a job, and when every day we put our uniform on, we were supposed to be professional. And there was all these things they told me in basic training about, you know, having a higher standard. You're a soldier now. You're supposed to live to a higher standard. You're supposed to be professional, which in my mind meant that when you went to work, you treated everybody equally and the same. And sex didn't matter, or the fact that somebody was a different race or gender, that wasn't supposed to matter in my mind, but apparently it does. And I know it's still a struggle, like even to this day, it's still a struggle in the military and out of the military. But yeah, there was many opportunities all throughout my career where you know, I had to say, hey, that's enough. Hey, I don't want to hear that. Hey, why are you talking like that? Hey, we don't speak like that in here. Like, hey, once I started getting up in the ranks, then I knew I could make a difference. Like, I didn't have to be the one always listening and waiting for someone else to say something. I knew as soon as I was in a position to make a difference, I absolutely made sure I did. And that's why I volunteered to be the sexual harassment and assault prevention. I did a lot of training on it. I also was an advocate for anyone who was harassed or assaulted. So that definitely was in my wheelhouse because I felt powerful in speaking for other people.
Thanks a lot for coming and sharing your experiences with us, and thank you very much for your service to our country. Thank you.